Know before you go.
Imagine going to the beach and you're at 0 feet sea level and you look straight up in the air, and 1 3/4 of a mile above you is a house. That's our house. Flew the Coop and the Sunrise Suite are at 9,100 feet of elevation. That is just shy of 1 3/4 of a mile up in the air. So if you look at the picture I'm showing right here, notice the green line. That's where Woodland Park, our closest town, and our properties sit. You are almost 1/3 of the way up Mount Everest. What's even more amazing is that if you go to the summit of Pikes Peak, whether it's hiking or driving or the Cog Railway once it's open again, you're going to go yet another mile above our property. So you are now close to 3 miles above sea level. So I wanted to do a video on elevation and high altitude. I've learned through my research that I did for this episode, and let me get it out of the way. I'm not a doctor, I'm not a scientist, I'm just Joseph. So I'm regurgitating everything that you're going to hear in this video. But to me, it's fascinating. And one of the things that was an aha moment for me during this video is that the higher you go, it's not that there's less oxygen in the air, it's that it's more dispersed. There's still 21% oxygen in the air. It's just at sea level, the gravity has pulled the molecules down and it's more dense, so there's more of it to take in more easily. The higher and higher you go, the more dispersed those oxygen molecules get. And so there's fewer of them when you breathe in. So I wanted to do this video on elevation and altitude, and I wanted to talk about the effects of it on your body and what to expect if you're coming from a lower elevation. I also wanted to talk about its effects on motors, particularly your generator if you're out here camping. And I wanted to talk about it on cooking, if you plan to do some cooking when you're up at this elevation. So I hope you enjoy this video. So the first thing I want to talk about is the impact elevation has on your body. When you're coming up from a low elevation, especially an extremely low elevation, up to an elevation of 9,000 feet, what your body is going to do is it's going to start increasing its respirations. It's trying to gather more oxygen into your body. What the increased respirations are going to do is it's going to actually expel more water. You're actually breathing out H2O when you breathe. What that could possibly lead to is then dehydration, especially if you're not drinking your water. And then what does dehydration lead to? It decreases the blood's ability to deliver oxygen to your muscles. So what does all of this mean? It means that when you get here, and especially if you haven't hydrated, you could feel kind of like crap. You very well may feel fatigued. You very well may have a headache. You may have some dizziness, and you might even have some confusion. Okay, so we have the fatigue, the headaches, the dizziness, the light confusion, and those are typically what people feel. The guests, friends, family that have come up here, myself, my wife, have all expressed, wow, that's kind of how I feel right now. In extreme cases, you can encounter what's called high altitude pulmonary edema, which is water in the lungs, and high altitude cerebral edema, which I guess is water on the brain or in the brain. I don't know. Again, I'm not a doctor. Those are definitely worst case scenarios. If you are feeling not well and it's really uncomfortable, the number one thing you can do is get back down to lower elevation. For example, here at Flew the Coop, we're at 9,100 feet elevation, as I mentioned in the opening. We are 3,000 feet above Colorado Springs. So if you're not feeling so well while you're up here, take a day trip back down to the springs and visit Garden of the Gods or the Olympic Center or the zoo. So what should you do before you come here? According to the Cleveland Clinic Foundation, you should go talk to your doctor. See if they have any advice, see if they have any concerns. You should avoid caffeine and you should avoid alcohol. You should also drink plenty of water. You should also take your time coming to a much higher altitude. If you can avoid flying and you can drive in, that's a much better way to come up to altitude, especially if you can stop somewhere on the way in and spend the night at a midway range of elevation. Then once you get here, just relax. Relax for 24 hours. It takes 1 to 3 days for a person to acclimate to the new elevation. So take some time, maybe go for a drive, sit on the deck, enjoy the views, but just relax that first 24 hours and let your body catch up to what you've just put it through. And then plan your activities to go to even higher elevations. For example, if you want to go to the summit of Pikes Peak, put that towards the end of your trip's itinerary. Or for example, if you're going to go on big strenuous hikes, even up to higher elevations, put those a little later on your itinerary. All of this is going to give your body time to get used to the new altitude. It's going to let it start building up some additional hemoglobin in your system to carry that blood or carry that oxygen in the blood. And yeah, the whole thing is you just want to give your body time to adjust. And I think that that's going to help you have a much more pleasurable experience here in the mountains.
Look, I know very little about motors and engines. And when I came up here a couple of years ago, when I was starting to look for my generator, a buddy of mine said, well, you better have that thing rejetted. What the heck's rejet? So let's talk about altitude and atmosphere and its impact on motors. And specifically, I'll talk about generators. I'm assuming this goes for all kinds of motors. Again, I don't know motors very well. But I can tell you that if you do have a generator, and again, let me go to my fact sheet. For every 1,000 feet above sea level, your generator will lose 3% of its power because it runs on oxygen to combust. So at sea level, if you have a generator that runs at 100% capacity, by the time you're up here in this part of the country at 9,000, 10,000 feet elevation, your generator is only going to be running at 75% of its capacity. Further, because there's a lack of oxygen, the air is so thin, it's not going to combust as well. So what's going to happen is there will be an incomplete combustion. And instead of putting out carbon dioxide as a byproduct, it will put out a more lethal carbon monoxide as a byproduct. And I feel weird saying that because I thought all engines put out carbon monoxide. Again, folks, I'm regurgitating what I got off the internet. So your system is going to be less powerful. Know that based on what you need it to run. It's going to have less combustion, more inefficient combustion, leading to toxic gases. And finally, also what's going to happen is with thinner air, it has a chance that it could overheat. It's going to be, I guess, working harder, and your system could overheat and possibly cause damage to your system. So what do you do to combat this? Well, there's something called rejetting. And what rejetting is going to do is increase the fuel mixture into, laugh at me if you will, I don't know, carburetor, I think. It's going to increase the fuel so that when your system does combust, it does combust more completely. But here's another fact that blows me away. Even though you now have your system, your generator running properly, it still is going to run at the reduced power rate. So know that, again, based on what you need it to operate for you. So what is this rejetting? Honestly, I don't know. It is a device that you can go in and replace on your system or have somebody replace on your system. I have a Champion generator, and Champion actually talks about this in their owner's manual, and you can send off for something to have it rejetted, and it'll work the way it's supposed to, except with less power at the higher elevations. Here's the other catch though. Once you go back down in your elevation, you have to, I guess, rejet again, because you don't want it dumping as much fuel into the system as you do at higher elevations. So, little facts, short segment on this one, because again, I know very little about motors and engines. All I know is that I was told by a buddy that if you're going to have a generator at higher elevation, rejet. So if you were to ask me at what temperature water boils, my answer was going to be 212 degrees. That's before I learned a little fun fact that for every 500 feet you go up in elevation, the temperature to boil water drops by 1 degree. So the water here in my jet boil is probably sitting at about 194 to 195 degrees Fahrenheit. This does have a big impact on how you cook. For example, if you want to boil something at this elevation, you're gonna have to boil it longer perhaps to get it to the doneness that you want it. It's also much more dry up here. So when you're making those steaks or you're making that chicken, you're gonna have to do certain things to help retain the moisture in the meat that you're cooking, because it will dry out. And finally, if you're a baker, the air pressure and gases at this altitude are going to cause your doughs to rise much more quickly. And something I saw in my research is that you may need to knead your bread twice. So to become a master chef at this level may take some adjustment and extra skills into your game. So what is it that needs to be done to adjust for cooking at this altitude? Well, one thing is you're supposed to add a quarter to your cooking time. So if something is supposed to cook for 2 hours, then I can't do math off the top of my head, but add 25% of the time to that and cook it that much longer. With your meats and your other foods that tend to dry out, you want to keep them covered. You also may want to do, you want to juice them. You want to put juice into those meats perhaps. And yeah, let's move on. And then when you're baking a cake or breads, I've never baked bread, but when I've baked cakes or cookies or whatnot for my wife, you want to perhaps add some extra egg or some sort of water, extra oil, something in there to help it have a little bit of moisture, because that moisture is going to evaporate off at this altitude. And finally, what's recommended is to use a meat thermometer, because again, it might be a guessing game based on the altitude you're at, how long you're going to have to cook some chicken out on the grill. So use a thermometer and make sure you have the right temperatures for the foods that you're going to consume. So to wrap all this up, life is much different at high altitude. Be prepared for it for when you come, so that you have a much more enjoyable experience. All the information that I have talked about, again, was regurgitated, and in the descriptions below are going to have links that's going to give you the information that I pulled this from, and maybe you'll learn something additional from it. So I hope you found this informative. I hope it was a little bit entertaining. Thanks for watching Flew the Coop.
Got it? Good.